Hello, humans of Extinction Rebellion. I am Fox. I'm one of XR London and National social media coordinators, and I wanted to do this tutorial for you guys today to start empowering local and national groups around the world to manage their social media in the same way that we did during the rebellion back in November in London, and in general going forward, learning from some of the mistakes that we made, and also from our successes, and so that you guys can adapt the strategy to wherever you're working, the size of your team, and your location, and the different skills that you have in your group. So just before I go into talking in more detail about this, I wanted to remind you guys of why we're doing this and why we're here. People join the rebellion for lots of different reasons. Some of them it's to do with climate change and mitigation of it. Some of them it's to do with social justice and finding true democracy in our society. For me, what's really important is wild nature and protecting what's left of it. So that's why I chose to do this tutorial outside today. It's a beautiful sunny day in London's winter. There's frost on the ground, and the water's frozen beside me. There's some birds about. Sun is out, and there's even a family of foxes in a den behind me. So I just wanted to speak to that and remind some of you, ask you why you're doing this and what it's for, because it's very easy to lose yourself in a screen when you do a lot of the social media work. Also, in case you were wondering, yes, the fur is fake, and it's also second-hand. So without further ado, I'm going to present to you my extremely high-tech apparatus here to describe what's going on. If this is a simplified diagram of our media and messaging working group, which connects to lots of other working groups in XR UK and National, we are mainly split into 4 broad subgroups or areas. Okay, and each of these has their own coordinator or coordinators. So you can imagine that these coordinators tend to have a lot to do, and it's quite easy as the movement grows in your location or elsewhere for them to have more and more tasks as things build up and more people come in, until eventually they're overloaded or they're doing too much. So one of the ways that we reduce the workload is to have at least 2 coordinators in every coordination position, right, in each of these, for example. So that splits the workload in time and potentially in the specific type of thing that they're doing, but also helps to mitigate for police or any other group targeting a particular person. So if they get arrested, there's always a backup. If they burn out, there's always someone else there, or if they, for another reason, have to leave the movement or become ill, there's another person who can step right in there. So you kind of create a Hydra situation within the rebellion. If you guys don't know what the Hydra is, it's like a mythical, scaly monster with 9 heads, and every time you cut off one of the heads, 2 more grow in its place. So that's the kind of situation that we want to have with the rebellion. Okay, so I'll talk very, very briefly about some of these subgroups, but because I don't coordinate them, I won't go into a whole lot of detail. We've got press, which is liaising with the mainstream media, newspapers, news outlets and TV, etc. And they split some of their roles into specialist press, local press, national and international press, spokespeople and notables. Spokespeople are the people who might go on TV for an interview and speak in a kind of representational way for the rebellion. Notables might be people with a large audience, people like George Monbiot and the Harris brothers, who helped us out a lot in London, who can spread the message for us, or potentially come to our actions to encourage more people to come with them. Content is the stuff that we make, the media that we make, so photography, videography and film, and written content like blogs or articles. And then social media, we're mainly split into the 4 main platforms that we use, which is Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and Twitter. To go into more detail specifically into the structure of social media, So we're split into the 4 platforms as I described to you earlier, and as you grow, you'll find that these people start to get overloaded, and that you want to split their roles up even more. So maybe at the start you might have just 1 person or 2 people coordinating the whole of social media. You'll realize very, very fast that this is a huge job to do, even for a relatively small business. You might be doing 20 or 30 hours a week of work, and as your movement grows, as the rebellion grows, this is going to get exponentially larger as more people join and as more actions start happening. Isn't that snow beautiful? It's just started snowing. You want to ideally start to fill these coordinator positions first with someone who knows what they're doing on these platforms. Okay, and again, as you start hiring or bringing in new coordinators into their roles, you ideally want 2 of them so that they can back each other up and split the workload. At the start, maybe 1 coordinator is fine, but then you want to start splitting into these different roles, which I'll go into in more detail in a minute. So part of this structure issue is that when you look at these different organizing structures, you might automatically assume that there's a hierarchy involved, and if you're not careful, that can actually happen. So I want to remind you that 2 of XR's working principles are that we actively mitigate for power, and that we're also based on autonomy and decentralization. So in this structure, coordinators don't give orders, they give communications, in my personal view. So and one of the ways that we decentralize this power and avoid overwhelm and too much workload going to these coordinator positions is to bring in new people to take away chunks of their roles, essentially. So if your social media coordinator is doing all of these platforms at the start, when they bring a new person in to coordinate one of them, suddenly they're only doing 3 platforms or 2 platforms and then 1 platform. So for example, I managed to get in people to coordinate YouTube and Twitter pretty early, and then Facebook, and then moved to just coordinating Instagram, and then just carried on giving information and passing on communications to some of those people. So if there are any police infiltrators or information gatherers watching this video, sorry, you're already too late. I brought in enough people that if you arrest me now, all of it will carry on going as if nothing had ever happened. So we've got a Hydra situation. Chop my head off and 2 more will grow in its place. So again, these platforms, as they grow and as you get a bigger audience, you'll realize that there's still a lot to do in each of them. So as a coordinator of any of these platforms, but particularly coordinator of social media in general, I consider it, for decentralization, to be part of my role to make myself useless, basically. So the idea is that you bring in enough people who take enough of your role away that you no longer need to do any of the legwork. Once you've trained them up and they know what they're doing, they're into the thick of it, and you trust them to carry on going, they no longer need you to carry on doing things autonomously. And so you're not a boss so much as a communications relay. Even better than that, to make yourself completely redundant, as it were, you want to start making sure that all of these different platforms are really well connected to each other and to different working groups and different subgroups outside of social. Then none of the information actually needs to flow through you to get anywhere. It can just go directly between some of these subgroups. So for example, in these different platforms, you will need pretty strong connections with the content team. The content team are the ones who take photos and make videos, etc., which you'll be wanting to put out on social as media to go along with your post copy or to publicize an event, something like that. You'll also want to be liaising with the press team. So if we get any news coverage of your actions in the press, these do really well on social media. So if there's a news story about us, you'll want to get them to send you a link so that you can put it out on the different social platforms, for example, like Facebook and Twitter. And notables, a lot of notables, famous people, etc., might contact us directly through social, particularly on Instagram, for example, and you need potentially a person in notables having access to these platforms, or someone to liaise with them so that there's that two-way communication, and you can get in and have that conversation with them and discuss how they can get involved, if it's coming to some of our actions or if it's some kind of shout out, etc. In the same way, particularly if we want to cover actions or a social event and make sure that things are recorded, we want to have strong connections with action and logistics. So in this case, particularly the content team, the photographers and the videographers, but also social media live streamers need to have strong contact with action and logistics to know when things are going on and when they should be there and what they should and shouldn't be recording. So, and also there'll need to be other connections with other working groups that are important to every working group essentially and need strong contact with them, such as regenerative culture to support any of your activists who are struggling through the grief or who have any other kind of issues, need to tone down the stress or avoid burnout, and potentially the finance team as well for any of them who need financial support of some kind for their living costs if they're doing work with Extinction Rebellion full-time. So just make sure that those connections are there, and if people are directly connected to who they need to be connected to, then you no longer need to pass on those communications. So in each of these different platforms, I'll go through in a little bit of detail some of these roles, but there's a more detailed description of the roles in a document that I'll add to this video in the description, or that you can find on Basecamp. So the coordinator in each of these is the person who gets the posts out, writes the copy, and potentially schedules them in advance. So on Facebook, for example, you can do that through scheduling directly onto a Facebook page. Twitter and Instagram, you might be using third-party software like Buffer or Hootsuite to pre-schedule those posts so that you know that they're going to go out at a specific time. So the coordinator chooses what media to put up, what news stories, etc., and when they go out. And again, you can have more than one of those coordinators. Then we have live coverage. So on Twitter, this is a live tweeter, someone who's like taking a photo or making a short video and getting a tweet out from the action, probably every 20 minutes or so, of what's going on. Live streamers on Facebook and Instagram will be live streaming from their phone what's going on and need to be in strong contact with action and logistics, or you need to put them in contact and tell them in advance when those actions are going to go down. Instagram has a particular role running the Instagram stories. So those are really, really important on Instagram, and getting those designs out and shout outs, maybe reshares or reposts of other local or national groups who've done an action near you that you want to talk about. And also potentially getting links out through the swipe up. Facebook events is a very important particular role for Facebook. So making sure those events are made and publicized through the feed when necessary, and making sure that link gets out to everybody who needs to see it so that it's public, and try and get as many people signing up to go to the event as possible. But also potentially posting in the event discussion to engage more people and encourage them to bring their friends and all of that. Then there's also, again on YouTube, just a coordinator and potentially a copywriter to focus on keywording for search engine optimization, to get the right keywords in so that it pops up on searches on Google, because YouTube's really important for SEO, search engine optimization. And you may also be using other platforms like Snapchat, very important for young people, for example, who want to mobilize more, Flickr, Tumblr, and then other decentralized or otherwise more ethical platforms like Mastodon or Minds. So if you want to bring in people whose role it is to coordinate those more specifically, you can do. Then there's other roles within social that kind of overlap quite heavily with outreach and training. So there's a group of outreach and training in XR UK called the Reactive Team, and they are the people who do moderation and replying to messages on the inbox and in DMs for Twitter and Instagram on the different platforms of questions that people might bring in, criticisms that they might have, and also for requests for people to get involved or come to another action. So in your team, you might choose to have those people actually under the social media group because they overlap quite heavily with us, and obviously they need access to our platforms. For us, the inbox and the moderators are on a different platform. Again, when it comes to all of these roles, you can have several of them. So you might want several live streamers and live tweeters. You might want several retweeters and definitely several moderators and people replying to inbox messages, because there's a lot to do, and then you also reduce the amount of time that each person has to work. So one of the points of splitting all of these roles, all of these platforms into several roles, is that each person has less things to do, less time to commit, and you enable volunteers who are potentially working other jobs or working full-time to contribute and to be part of the process, and as well as decentralizing not just workload but power to as many people as possible to get them involved, give them that sense of agency and give them their role to play in the rebellion, whether it's arrestable or not. So I think that's basically the structure of social media. So thank you for listening to me ramble on for ages. I hope the birds weren't making too much noise in the background. If you guys have any questions, please comment them below and we'll try and get back to you, and we'll also add in some of the relevant documents in the event description. I'll be trying to make some more of these tutorials on how we run social and media messaging in XR UK and XR London, so stay tuned for more on the Humans of XR hashtag and Humans of XR stories, on what affinity groups are and how you can cover the action from embedded content creators inside affinity groups, and several other things on how we run social and how we got this off the ground. So stay tuned for more of our mistakes and more of our successes and how you can learn from them. I hope this was really helpful to you, and I'll see you on the streets on April 15th. Goodbye, Rebels.